Hello, it's Scott Manley here with another beginner's guide to Kerbal space program. We have completed many missions, we have rescued Kerbals from orbit, we've rendezvoused, we've put satellites into orbit, but we now have a number of contracts, which will relate to going to the moon. Now, in previous tutorials I've generally recommended that players go to Minmus first, but I'm going to go to the moon simply because I've got all these contracts for it. If you send a space probe to Minmus, you will probably get science for going to that, but let's take these. So these have expiration date of 1 day 5 hours. Now that's how long it will be before the contract is removed from the list of available. Once you accept it, you still have 10 years to complete it. So don't worry about these expiration dates. It's the duration that you're more interested in. Collect science data from around the moon. That's great. And we have orbit the moon. Let's accept that. Oh look, we have some science data from around Kerbal. Once again, that's a nice freebie to have. Let's do that. Oh, temperature scans of the moon. Oh, well, the thing is, these require you to perform temperature scans below a certain altitude, which might be quite complicated, so I'm going to leave that off for now. Now, we have 180 science. What's the best thing to unlock for the moon? So I would say, what I would say is fuel systems are really, really good to have because they let you have these large fuel tanks. But more importantly, you are allowed to have these external fuel ducts. These are fuel pipes. They let you transfer fuel between parts of your rocket, which means you can do things like asparagus staging, external fuel tanks and things like that. So that's a really good thing to have. Now, if you've got these large ones, it would seem logical to take get the first of these large engines. It would be equally logical to take the barometer here, because that will be adding more science. But another option is the advanced flight control, because this gives you the Mark 1 lander can, and the miniaturization gives you the miniature docking port. We'll probably go for that next, but for right now I'm going to stick with heavy rocketry. Even if I don't use these parts, I think it's good to have them around. Now we've got a nice advance from accepting these. That means we can right click on the research and development facility and upgrade it. And we can upgrade our vehicle assembly buildings so we can build bigger and more complicated rockets. The R&D upgrade is really important because it lets Kerbals start to take surface samples. I'm not going to send a Kerbal to the moon on the first attempt because, of course, then you deal with the prospect of having to rescue them if you don't do it. I think it's better if you just build a space probe, so let's do that. Okay, so let's get to work building our moon probe. The core will, of course, be the Probodobodine Octo, which has all the functionality we need. Now, we're going to be building a spacecraft around it, and we need to turn it. So I'm going to add this little small inline reaction wheel that will give me a bit more control. Ideally, we want to recover this. You know, depending upon how much fuel we have left, we would like to bring it back to Kerbal for extra points. But just in case, I'm going to attach an antenna on top of it, just in case we end up stuck in orbit or something, so we can collect the science. For science purposes, we're going to have a Science Junior for collecting data on the surface. I'm going to put a couple of these, you know, mystery goo containers on there, and a couple of these too hot thermometers. Again, this is just to make sure that we have something to collect. Now, this thing needs power, so put a pair of solar panels on the side and a pair of batteries on the other side. So that will be the science package. To return it to Kerbal safely, we will need a heat shield. That'll help us bring it down, and with the reaction wheel here, that will help keep it stable during the descent, because it should have enough control authority, right, to counteract the aerodynamic forces. Now for the actual lander, I'm going to use the FLT 200 fuel tank. Oh, and you know what I forgot was a decoupler. Obvious mistakes. You can tell I record these things in one take because I make mistakes like that. For engines, we're going to use the LV909 Terrier. That's an excellent engine for landing. So this thing should have, I don't know, about 1.5 kilometers per second of delta V, which should be enough to, from lunar orbit, land on the moon, get off the moon, and return to Kerbal. Should, in theory. Of course, theory sometimes doesn't work quite as well as we expect, so that's why I've got the antenna on it. For landing gear, put these little probe landing gear on. Now these things are actually, they're kind of small. You see that when it's spread out, it's not quite as spread out as you would like. But you can fix that a little. First of all, you can grab these and rotate them outwards by 15 degrees. That's one notch is 15 degrees. That increases the width of your landing area, so it should make it easier to land. And for offset, just make sure that there's enough clearance above the engine, because you don't want the engine to get damaged, otherwise you might find yourself stranded there. But it is a space probe, we don't care too much. I would also lock the suspension on it so there's no chance that it wobbles over or anything. Okay, so that is our lander. Now we need to get this all the way to the moon. And let's use some of these new parts. Well, first after we've added the stack decoupler here. So, we just unlocked this FLT 800 fuel tank, and that is going to form the core of our spacecraft, right? I'm going to build a couple of these and an FLT 400 and propel that behind an LVT 45, a swivel. Swivel means that the engine can actually swivel around to provide some guidance. It's called gimballing, and that's very useful for giving you control during ascent, right? Okay, so that's the core. What I'm going to do now is duplicate these things. So I'm going to, actually I shouldn't have put these on, I'll take these off temporarily. Oh, I shouldn't have took these on, put these on. I'm going to copy these, and what we're going to do is attach these to the sides. We're going to use these as external boosters. We have the radial decoupler here, let's just attach 2 of those. And then attach these to the side. So I just put it on over there. And that is the core of our spacecraft. So let's actually close these up because we don't need these anymore. We'll need some aerodynamics on the nose here. I guess that's the nose cone of choice. If you want, you could try putting parachutes on these things. Now, that will provide extra thrust during ascent, having 3 engines instead of 1. But what we're going to do is use the fuel lines to improve things. We just unlocked the external fuel duct. Now what this does is it transports fuel from one object to another. So what I'm going to do is use these as external tanks. So we put a little fuel duct here on the outside one to start there, and then tell it to flow inwards, right? So what'll happen is this core fuel tank will not get used at all until these external fuel tanks have been exhausted. At which point, of course, we ditch it and fly off. So this core is going to be very important to our spacecraft. And I'm just going to adjust the position of this a little. It's kind of, ideally you want this, you know, as close to the middle of the rocket as possible to minimize the amount of flexion that goes on. Let's put these fins back on. Again, adding some stability. Now that will probably wobble if I use that, so let's add some struts. Struts are always good. They provide, you know, rigidity where otherwise there may not be any. So that should be an excellent moon probe. What should we call it? Let's call it Heartbleed, because of course we're all about bleeding our fuel into the heart or something like that, right? There we go, that should work. So this stage will launch up. Oh, one thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to change these out. Now, this core one needs the gimballing, but I'm going to use these LVT-30 Reliant. They don't have the gimballing, but they're slightly lighter, and they provide more thrust, right? So they're actually good on this first stage. So I think that will actually work pretty well for our purposes. And the last thing to do is to make sure that all the engines fire simultaneously, so split these onto the same stage. Let's launch. And we should be ready to go. Throttle to 100%, check our contracts, check our resources, and hit space. And why aren't we going anywhere? Oh dear. This is supposed to have taken off, because I figured out it's thrust away. Yes. Oh look. Oh, there it goes. Okay. This is an old bug. This is the sticky launch pad bug. Let me show you. Sometimes the collision physics in Unity are a little dubious, and the spacecraft will stick to the launch pad. The best way to fix this is to make sure the rockets are not attached to the launch pad. So use the these TT-18 launch stability enhancers, a pair of them. These will just, they're called launch clamps. You can of course stick it down close to the ground if you want it to look good, or you could stick it as high as you like if you want to get a little head start. Make sure everything is in the same stage, and then hopefully this thing will actually work this time. Yes, that's what happens when you record these things in one take. Sometimes weird things happen. Okay, so we've got our stuff up, and yeah, you see? Yeah, I knew it had enough thrust to weight ratio to get off the launch pad. So this design is great because solid rocket boosters are good for thrust early on, but they're lousy in terms of delta V. You could, I mean, if you wanted, you could strap some solid rocket boosters onto the side of that and get a little more thrust, a little more acceleration off the launch pad, but this is going to be great because these will run for a good amount of time, get us well above, you know, 10-15,000 meters, and hopefully up to a reasonable speed. So I'm just turning the spacecraft over very slowly, of course. And we can look at our fuel. You see the middle fuel tank is not being used up at all. Instead, it is drawing its fuel from those external tanks. So those ones will run out and those side engines will burn out, and then we will ditch the whole thing and we will have a fully fueled middle stage to bring us all the way into orbit. This is something called Fuel Crossfeed, and there's not really any rockets to do this. The nearest is the space shuttle, which would draw its fuel from its external tank. But nobody actually does this whole process of fueling the core stage from the exterior boosters at this time. SpaceX are talking about doing this for Falcon Heavy, but you know, obviously that has yet to fly at this time. There, we're up to 15,000 meters and starting to burn down. Now look at the little bottom left corner. You can see the liquid fuel in those tanks. So, you know, we want to ditch those as soon as that fuel goes to zero. Right-click on the fuel tank to find out which one is being drained and ditch it. A beautiful separation. That is absolutely brilliant. Now we can continue into space. And this should actually be pretty good. Now, this process where I had the stages feeding the center stage, you can do this in, you know, multiple layers, and then that becomes something called asparagus staging. You'll read about this a lot in the forums. On paper, it's the most efficient way to get, if you've got multiple stages, it's best to have all the engines firing and everybody feeding their fuel into the next stage, so that each stage always starts with 100% thrust. Or 100% fuel, I mean. Anyway, I need to correct this orbit just a bit because you can see that I'm slightly north or slightly south here. So I'm just going to, you know, thrust off center, try to bring that velocity vector back along the equator. The reason being that the moon is on an orbit which is aligned with Kerbin's equator. So if we keep those as closely aligned as possible, it will simplify the actual interception and orbital insertion at the moon when we get there. We're gonna try and aim for an apoapse of about 80 kilometers. You don't really want to go as high as you do for like a regular satellite or whatever. I normally put things at about 100 kilometers just out of, you know, force of habit. The closer you are to Kerbin when you make your lunar insertion burn, the better, the more efficiency you'll get. So I'm going for an 80 kilometer orbit here. That gives us just a little bit of wiggle room. I mean, if you want to be super awesome about things, you can actually do your lunar insertion burn while still inside the atmosphere. But I'm just gonna do that. Now, important to note here, we're running out of electrical charge very slowly, and that's because the orientation of the solar panels is not conducive. So I rotate things around, and now you see the power drain on the electric charge is negative. Negative is good. Negative means that you're gaining electrical charge. Positive means that you're losing electrical charge. We're going to add the maneuver to get into orbit and just adjust this a little. Bingo. Okay, bingo there. Just try and get that lined up. 77 by 83. Great. That is an excellent orbit for our purposes. While we're here, we're going to target the moon, and that will actually let us begin to initiate, figure out where we're going to perform our transfer. Okay, estimated burn is 15 seconds. The node is in just under 2 minutes, and while we're here, we've got our spacecraft lined up, and I think we have a contract to collect science from near Kerbin. Okay, so to do that, the only experiment we want to use for that is temperature, which we have already done. Log temperature, great. But we can transmit it, and once the transmission is complete, we should see this experiment. There we go. Bingo, we now have credit for that. That was essentially free science, because we needed to bring the the thermometer up with us, and the thermometer is reusable as many times as you need. The mystery goo and the materials exposure experiments are not reusable. Okay, now we're pretty close to our burn. 10, 9, 8, 7, thrust! Get it, thrust, get ourselves into orbit here. Okay, I'm just going to eyeball these numbers here. So we're going to aim for about 2250. And bingo! That's pretty close. Let's see how we're doing. So periapse 727, yeah, that's acceptable, I think. 71, 81, there. Actually, that's pretty good. Okay, so we're not going to fall back into the atmosphere. Now we need to get to the moon, and we know that we're going to have to perform an insertion burn or a transfer burn. So again, what you do is you get these kind of lined up horizontally, and then at the bottommost point, you add a maneuver, and then you drag the prograde vector all the way out until you encounter the moon. Look at how easy that is! How easy is that? There, 187. You can try to adjust this. You can actually use the mouse cursor, but I don't find it that useful. Some people like it. See that? That's 39 kilometers. 39 kilometers is a pretty tight encounter. I'm all about that. Okay. So before we're going to go all the way around the planet, I'm going to rotate the spacecraft to point in the correct attitude. Now, a word of warning to you, because you only have 2 solar panels, it's very important that you make sure you leave the spacecraft in an attitude which will make sure that it always gets solar power, because it's entirely possible sometimes to put your spacecraft into a position where it comes out of shadow, it runs out of power, and once it's out of power, there's no way to turn your spacecraft, and since you end up having to wait a long time before the position of the sun moves to get power back. That's us. Okay, 16 minutes. Time to time accelerate. Easy enough here. Zip around the planet. Any quick excursion, saying hi to everything. Look at my gorgeous planet below me. This is teaching the kids back home so much about science. Okay, we're going to shut down with about 1 minute to go. I guess I could have used the warp 2 option. Again, 38 seconds, so we're going to split this 50-50. So around about 20 seconds, we're going to go up to 100% thrust. And then once we get close to burning out, once we get close to it, I'll throttle down to do the last bit a little more accurately. This is on the night side, so it's hard to see very much. There is a mod which adjusts ambient light. Very useful mod to have if you're making videos, but I did want to do a completely stock version. Okay, there we go, 100% thrust. So while this is going, I'm going to switch over to this view, and we're going to watch it from here. So I'm going to keep an eye on this, and once we get to within a few seconds burn, I'm going to throttle down to about 30% to make things more accurate, to give me more control, right? Going at 100% is the way rockets work, but Kerbal rockets allow you to throttle. There are a few rockets which actually allow you to throttle, but generally you do burns at 100% thrust. Okay, so bringing the thrust down, and I'm just trying to get as close to this as possible. See this? It's getting up, and when I get an encounter, I'm going to throttle all the way down. See this? So we're actually going slightly higher, but that's okay. And we're going to get this encounter, and then I'm just going to touch it very carefully. Oh, shoot. Ah, yes. Messed that one up. I pressed Z instead of X. See, these things happen, but how do I fix it? Well, I'm just going to turn my spacecraft around. Wasted a bunch of fuel there performing a maneuver which was completely unnecessary. That is unfortunate. But we still have a little bit of fuel in this main tank here, and that's good for us. Okay, so just point retrograde. Ignore this maneuver node now. I'm just going to point along the retrograde vector and use the shift key. You're going to get a little more control, by the way, if you have your engines on. That was really, really embarrassing. But you know what? Here's the thing. You just work with what you've got and you try to correct things. This is all wasted fuel, but it's not a huge disaster at this point. So get this down to as close as you dare. There, 31 kilometers. Well, looks like I wasted about 50 meters per second, but the mission should still have enough to complete. And I think I'm going to have to split this episode up, and I'll do the actual landing and return in the next one. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.